Welcome to Lesson 2 of Teach Me to Program C++ by Microsonic Development. Today's topic is using headers and classes. As we scroll down here a little bit, you can see this is a basic stub out of a whole C++ function. It doesn't do anything, but it'll compile and it'll run. So this is our initial starting point, what we're going to do. A header file generally follows the format of some name followed by a .h. As a C++ file is a .cpp or .cxx, however you name your files. A .h file is a header file. So what we will do is we will actually move over to that. I've already created it over here. And this is our .h file. Nothing's in it currently. What we're going to start by doing is using include guards. These are preprocessor definitions such that you don't have multiple redefinitions and things of whatever items you may have in this header file. For instance, you'll most likely be including a header file in multiple files, so this way it only gets included once and you don't have any sort of redefinition errors at link time. So to do this, you use the preprocessor ifdef followed by some unique identifier. Generally I follow a format such as this. Our file name is ball. It's a .h and then I use one extra underscore. So, if not defined, if ndef, then we want to define whatever we just used for our preprocessor up there. And then at the bottom we just want to do an endif. And I'll do this just for sake of clarity. So in this case, anything which falls in between the if and diff up here and the endif down here will only be included once, no matter how many times this file is included. So you won't get redefinition issues. That is the basics to writing a header file that probably won't make your program not compile. If you are having compilation issues and things, redefinitions, whatever the error may be, make sure that you have these. These are very important, especially as your programs get larger. So now we're going to begin a little bit about classes. This right here, what we'll be doing is a little bit of encapsulation, part of the three basics to object-oriented programming. The three basics being inheritance, encapsulation, and polymorphism. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a class, but we're just going to define it, and we're not going to declare it, and we're not going to actually define it in this file. We're going to define it in a corresponding .cpp file, which we will call ball.cpp, and that will allow people to include our header without really knowing the code behind it. We'll explain that in a little bit after we flesh out this simple declaration. So to start making a class, you actually use the keyword class, and then you give it a name. In our case, we're just going to do ball because that's what we're going to create. You're going to open it just as you would have a normal function or something of that nature, and to close it, you're going to use a close brace as usual. However, due to certain parameters that we won't use here, you do need to add an extra semicolon after here. If you don't add the semicolon, it's not going to compile. It's going to give you an error because there is another parameter here that you can put. However, we're not going to use that. Alright, so by default, class objects are private, meaning you can't access anything just declared right here. So what we're going to do is put the public keyword in the beginning of the class. This allows anything after this, before another keyword that is, to be public. So what we're going to do is define or declare a constructor which is invoked at the time of object creation, and a destructor which is invoked at the time of object destruction. Now notice that you will never explicitly call these. These are called when you create or destroy the object. This little tilde here is the mark of a destructor. So it's not a typo, that's what it actually is. Notice that we can also create another constructor as well with different parameter types, but we'll get back to that in a moment. So as we go, we'll think of things that are relevant to our class. We're creating a ball, so a relevant topic may be the ball's radius. So what we can do is we can create a function as part of the ball called setRadius, and it will take an integer value. Right now that this does nothing. It's just saying to whoever's included the header file and is using our class, it says we do have a setRadius member. You can call it and it will do something. Well, generally speaking, it will set the radius because that's what we said it'll do, but they don't know how it's going to do it, and they shouldn't really care. And then so if we're going to set the radius, we should probably have a way to get it back. So we're going to create another method that's going to return an integer called getRadius. It's not going to have any type. Great. Here's our first public stub of the class ball. We have a public constructor and destructor, and we have two public members of the class ball, void setRadius and integer getRadius. So what we want to do now is actually have variables to hold that radius information. So in order to do that, we don't want them to access the variables ever directly. We want our class to deal with the variables, and we want them to use these methods to change or receive the variables. You could imagine if we gave them access to our variables, if they didn't set them as we anticipated, it could make big problems later. So what we're going to do is we're going to declare now a private section to this class. The private keyword works in the same way as the public keyword. Anything below this, before another declaration, for instance here, everything from here to here is public, and anything below this private will be private now until another keyword is set. So we're going to create some integer called radius. So now what's really happening here is the class ball has all these members. If you were to attempt to call setRadius without it being part of the ball object, there would be nothing defined at this point for it. So it is important to notice that these are actually objects on this class. So without this class, these objects don't even exist, similar to a scoping. So now we're going to actually declare these things and make them work. So in our corresponding ball.cpp file, we'll go down and we will actually include our header, ball.h. So now you can see we have our included header, so our whole class definition is already, or declaration is already included into this file. So we are able to actually declare them and make them real functions. So we'll start off with a constructor. It's class ball, so we're going to use the scoping operator, which is 2 colons, and then ball is also the constructor. So here's an empty constructor. Notice this portion tells what we're defining for. If we forgot this and we just type this, we would get an error. One, because we have no type. Constructors and destructors are typeless. And two, because it's not our constructor. This is our constructor. It is in ball, and it's obviously constructor has the exact same name as the class. Same thing with the destructor. So what we want to do first, we'll just initialize radius, which is a member on ball, so we don't need to define it again as an int, and we'll just set it equal to 1 to start. Our default radius will be 1. Now let's go into the destructor, and it will be an empty destructor. We don't have anything to really do with it right now, but you do need to define it. So as we continue to go down, we will create our method void ball setRadius, which takes an integer value. We'll just call it rad. So we want to set our radius equal to rad. So whenever this method is called, our radius will actually update. Although they cannot actually, they meaning whoever's using our class cannot directly access the variable radius, they can access this public member to change the radius for us. And then finally, we want to create an integer get radius, which will return the radius. Again, they couldn't read this variable directly because it is private to our object. However, with this get method, we can return the value so they can actually see what it really is. So that is our full ball class written up and ready to use. So how do we actually use this? We implemented it, we gave it objects and features. Now what use is this? Well, going back to our main program here, we should include ball.h again. This is why this is one of the reasons those include guards are important. We're including in multiple files. It is important to realize we only include .h files, with one exception, which deals with templatization, which we'll discuss later. You will never include a .cpp file. A .cpp file is just code, and it's never included for general purposes. In fact, what happens, the whole reason that you can actually use this class with just the .h file included is at link time, these definitions will replace everywhere you have declared these ball instances.